Hi everyone! Welcome to today's lecture on how to teach listening. So, first I want you to think about it. Is listening a passive or an active skill? Well, we all think of it as a receptive skill, which means that generally we're not having to do any work when we listen. Just like reading also is a receptive skill. And a synonym for receptive would be passive. But at the same time, if you want to be a good listener, then of course you need to be active. Richard says that listening is considered to involve the active selecting and interpreting of information coming from auditory clues so that a listener can identify what is happening and what is being expressed. So, what does listening involve, especially if one is to be active at listening? Well, you have to be able to identify information, which means that you should get the gist of what the speaker is trying to tell you. It involves you searching through your memories to see if you have any information about the topic that you're listening to. And you have to relate the new information to those memories. So is there any connection to your prior knowledge? And you fill it into the proper spot in your brain. So it either relates to those memories or it's brand new information that goes into a new slot in the brain. In that case, you have to create a new place for it. And you'll be able to use that information when needed. This is called recall. So, what makes up effective listeners? They should be able to monitor their comprehension. They should be able to associate the new information with their background knowledge. They should make inferences about unknown words. That is, they can use the context clues to help them guess what those words might mean. They can continue listening even if they don't understand certain words. And hopefully the more that they hear, then they would be able to make inferences about the situation. And they can have metacognitive knowledge about the task. Remember that metacognition is thinking about thinking. So whenever there's a task in front of them, they can think about how they would actually go about tackling that task. So for example, if the teacher is to tell you that you should make a family tree and submit it tomorrow in class, then you have to think about, what do I need to make the family tree? Well, I know that I need to gather some pictures, or I need to ask my parents about other members of the family whom I might not know. And you have to manage to get the main idea rather than just listening word for word. What can interfere with listening comprehension? Of course, unfamiliar vocabulary, grammar, especially if you are an English language learner. The text could be too long and it could just be overwhelming for you, especially if the material is unfamiliar. There could be several people talking, and so you're not able to listen because you're not sure who is saying what. It could just be too confusing. And that's especially true if the text is too long. If the dialogue is too long, what you're listening to, and several people are talking, then it just could lead to confusion. Again, there could be an unfamiliar context that you don't have prior knowledge of. And there could be too many details. So for example, dates or numbers. Those could be really confusing. And just in general, you might not be motivated to listen because the topic might not be interesting to you. And the theme may not be clear. People's accent could get in the way. The speed of their speech could also hinder your understanding. There could be too many idioms, like killing two birds with one stone, or the straw that broke the camel's back. Those things can be very confusing, I guess, for ELLs because they're thinking of it literally, word for word, rather than knowing what the idiom means. The task may be too difficult for them. And they could also be unprepared for the discussion and for the discussion of the format. And as generally they could have a lack of background information, which means they don't have a lot of prior knowledge on that topic. So for example, if I were to give a talk about Buddhism, I'm pretty sure that you might not have a lot of background information about Buddhism, and the topic may not be interesting to you, and so therefore it may be a difficult listening text for you. So how do most teachers teach listening? Well, we call this the TTT approach. I wonder if you can guess what those T's mean. You got it. Test, test, test. So teachers tend to play a CD or a video from YouTube, and they let students listen to it just once, maybe twice in a row, and then they give them a test immediately afterwards on what they heard. This is a sink or swim method that if your listening skills aren't good enough to understand the text, then of course you're going to sink. The use of passage with multiple choice questions or fill in the blanks. These are often the traditional types of exercises that follow a listening task. So, if I'm to tell you that the TTT approach is bad, then how? How should you go about teaching listening? How can you prepare your students for listening tasks? So, the first thing you need to do is let your students understand how foreigners speak English and build on students' sensitivities. So that means you need to try to provide some authentic listening exercises for them. We can give them some guidelines and give them an opportunity for meaningful practice with what they're going to learn in the text. You need to try to involve the student so that they're actively listening. So first, select material that's relevant to the student, something that's interesting. So these days they're all interested in games or technology. So if you were to find something along those topics, then it might be very interesting. If you have a room full of athletes, then they might find that topic to be very interesting. Provide some of the background knowledge on the topic so that any students who don't have the prior knowledge would be able to catch on and understand what the topic of the discussion might be. Give them a pre-listening exercise to try to activate content. So for example, perhaps I was going to do a listening on the Olympics, and I would provide students with some information about the Olympics and allow them to do a pre-listening activity that generated what information they already have about the Olympics. So you might show them some pictures or ask them about some famous Olympians in the past, talk about the Olympics that were just held in Rio, see what they know. And then actually have them look at some of the unfamiliar vocabulary that might be in the listening so that they're more prepared. Be sure to use a variety of activities anytime you introduce a new listening passage. So, here are some ideas of things you could do to help students overcome the difficulties. You could give them charts, T-charts, pie graphs, tables, categories. You could ask them questions ahead of time to see what they know. You could show them different pictures and charts. You could discuss the topic first. So if we're talking about the Olympics, again, just see what the class knows and what they think about the Olympics before you have them do the listening passage. Describe the context and even role play the situation that might be involved in the listening. Provide a key word list and give the students ample time to find the definitions. could brainstorm different situations, the pros or the cons of different situations. So, for example, if we were talking about the presidency and the fact that Trump is doing so well, you could have students make a list of the pros and the cons of him being the president. You could have them predict what the topic might be. Again, if we're talking about Trump, they could predict, is he going to win the election or not, and why? And then you could do some follow-up activities that allow the students to really connect with this topic in their lives. So with the election, although students in Guam cannot vote, but they do have local elections that they can once they get 18. So you could ask them about family and if family votes and if they intend to vote once they reach the age of 18. And then, of course, if you're going to do pre-listening, and then you have some activities they're going to do as they listen, then you also want to do some post-listening activities, which are follow-up activities. So they could listen more to other passages on the same topic. They could do writing activities to express their reactions or feelings to the topic. They could role play. And you might want to spice things up a bit by having students do a jazz chant or jokes about the topic, puzzles, or write a poem about the topic. Anything that involves them being creative would be highly appreciated by the students. So when it comes to teaching listening, students need to know what strategies that they can utilize. There are different bottom-up strategies and different top-down strategies. Let's take a look at both. So bottom-up strategies means they're looking word for word. So you could have them count syllables by using a rubber band. So for example, syllable, then they would flick the rubber band 3 times as they say each syllable. You could teach them word stress by circling the stressed syllable, underlining the unstressed syllable, circle the most stressed word in a sentence. They could use party noisemakers or a flute or some other instrument to help them get the sound and the stress. And here it will become more kinesthetic, so they would actually enjoy incorporating some sound as they're reading the different sentences that would be in the listening passage. You could focus on pronunciation. Here some ideas might be minimal pair practice, like lice and rice, pen and pen. They could choose to work on the present tense or the past tense or whichever tense is most predominant in the listening passage. They could change pronunciation or talk about blurred speech. So, what do you mean? Where's the boy? Something like that. And actually teach and get them to listen and find the word groups. So you could take the script and have them go through it and mark what they think the word groups are. And then they could listen to the tape, the CD, or the YouTube video and get them to notice things about how English is spoken. Are there any idioms? Is the speaker being formal or casual? And then for top-down strategies, you're going to get them thinking first. So get students to determine what's the setting, what interpersonal relationships are going on if there are multiple speakers, what's the topic, what's the mood, what's the main idea. So in bottom-up strategy, they're looking at the words first, the small things first. But with top-down strategies, they're looking at the main idea first and then working their way down towards the small elements like the vocabulary and the grammar. Other top-down strategies would include helping students to make hypotheses, to predict, to infer. You can give them some examples from the story and have them infer or guess what the story is about from just a few words. And then, of course, if you need to know more information about listening, here are some other resources that you could go to. Randall's ESL Cyber Listening Lab is a good one. There's BBC News and BBC Online Soap Operas. There's CNN Student News. So all of these aren't as difficult as the regular, for example, CNN or BBC that we watch as native speakers. These are generated for students. And they could listen to different podcasts as well too. And here are some examples. So hopefully you have all the information that you need to know about listening. So let's develop some activities ourselves, and good luck.